Audio Jungle.
Whoops, messed up that little intro. And we're live. Friends from around the world, welcome to the Great Debate. Not a debate where both sides work to defeat one another, rather a debate where both sides come together to find common ground on the most important issues of our time. Today, an exciting one. We have two Jews living in the West Bank. Now you might be thinking, Jews living in the West Bank? What could they possibly disagree on? Well, you'd be surprised. Jews living in the West Bank are by no means monolithic, and today we're going to explore just that. We're going to touch on a whole array of topics, focusing primarily on visions for the state of Israel, approaches to reconciliation with the Palestinians, and analyzing the next objectives of Jewish liberation. Without further ado, a great pleasure. Damn, I keep messing up with the background. There we go. Now we got the background. Yishai, Yehuda, great to have you here. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to our Patreon Visionary members. We have Trivium Energy Pty Ltd, SOG Cannabis, and Max Marine. If you want to become a patron, you can find a link in the description. It's really our patrons who help us make this content and help us aid in the reconciliation process. So really, any support would be greatly appreciated. If you like what we do, like and subscribe. And as always, we're going to have Yehuda and Ishai join us for an after party on Discord. Jesse, if you can toss that link in there, that'd be awesome. Great. Yehuda, Yishai. We're going to start just by hearing. Feel free to introduce yourselves, but I also want to hear from you both your vision for the state of Israel. So Yishai, we'll start with you.
Okay, first thing, Adar, thank you so much for having me back on the Great Debate. It's fun to be with you, and it's fun to be with Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen, who is a dear friend and somebody who I tremendously respect in his work, and has granted me a lot of knowledge through his labor of trying to teach people and to give people vision for the Jewish state and for a better Middle East. So it's really an honor to be with both of you. My name is Yishai Fleisher, Rabbi Yishai Fleisher. I have the great zchut, the great merit of serving today as the international spokesman for the Jewish community of Hebron. That really means that I work for the tombs of the forefathers and mothers, which are in Hebron. That's the forefathers and mothers that are the founders of our peoplehood. So that's Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. And the book of Genesis and its heroes is...
Yishai, I'm not hearing you. Is that just on my end? Yeah. All right, you're back. Little mic hiccup. Wait, okay. Yehuda, did he were you able to hear him the whole time?
I was able to hear him the whole time.
Oh, okay.
I guess, okay, that's on me. My bad.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
In any case, back to Hebron, it's such an honor and a pleasure to work for them. For me, as just who I am inside, the thing that really, really, really drives me inside, and people ask me sometimes, like, what motivates you so much? What really, really at the end motivates me is the words of the Torah. And that's something that happened to me from a young age. The first time I picked up the Torah, and I was not born into a observant religious family, when I first got a hold of it, immediately it shone. It like a light came out of the words, and I was like, wow, this is real. And my parents, when they discovered this Torah, they immediately felt that it was also just real. And I think it actually fits right into what today is about. Today here in Israel already, it's the 7th of Adar, Zayin Adar, which is the birthday and the passing day of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our master, who gave us this Torah from Sinai. And so for me, working for the people who are the founders of the peoplehood, who are buried in Hebron, who are the stars of the book of Genesis, is one of the greatest honors of my life. And this follows a whole set of efforts for the last 20 years to help really do one thing, which is to make Israel more central in the eyes of Jewish people and the eyes of the world. And even deeper than that is to help bring God's presence to Zion. We have a a blessing that we say in the 18 benedictions prayer, Baruch Ata Hashem hamachzir shchinato leTzion. Blessed are you, God, who returns His presence to Zion. And that has been my driving impulse for many years. And my first job in Israel was to manage a radio station called Israel National News and Israel National Radio, Arutz Sheva's English language radio. And in that capacity, I was able to bring a lot of great broadcasters, including Rabbi Yehuda, into the fold of using their time here in Israel, being here in Israel in the land, but still broadcasting out into the world. And our messages were the rights of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and Judea and Samaria, getting closer to Torah, coming on Aliyah, or at least being more connected, minimally being more connected, and then coming on Aliyah to the land of Israel, and leaving wrong ideas and even different religions, coming closer to the Jewish story and the Jewish way of seeing things. And we had a great range of broadcasters, and I kept working in radio for many years, and was privileged to bring a lot of voices that kind of have become already famous today. Everybody from Eve Harrow to Rabbis Ari and Jeremy, and a lot of good folks that you know today came through the hallways of Arutz Sheva and later on Voice of Israel. And since I got a job at Hebron, I've had an opportunity to do a lot of things, including beautifying the Tomb of the Mothers and Fathers, adding beautiful flags, bringing a lot of
frozen on my end.
No, I don't.
Ishai, you're frozen completely. A little internet hiccup. We could blame it on the snowstorm. I'm going to text him. 2021, what year do you think it will need to be? Feel free to answer in the Jewish calendar. Will it need to be until we don't have internet issues anymore? I messaged him. Let's see. Yehuda, in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself and share your vision for the state of Israel.
Sure. My name is Yehuda. I've been here roughly almost 20 years. I was born and raised in New York. First person in my family actually to be born in the United States. My parents had come from elsewhere, and in both my parents' families, there'd been a lot of migration as well, meaning that even though I had been born in New York, we didn't really have roots there. My parents didn't really have roots in other countries either. The last place that either side of my family had roots was here. And for me, coming back to this country almost 20 years ago was really bringing my family's story full circle. Yishai's back. I'm going to give Yishai an opportunity to continue.
We have to remember that there's like snowfall around here, as you can see in my background. So it's just like the internet is a little bit spotty right now. The whole internet dropped out. Rabbi Yehuda, I was missing some of your stuff, and I'm looking forward. I hope you repeat it afterwards for me. In any case, you mentioned your parents, Rabbi Yehuda. I just want to say my parents are very instrumental for me. They are Russian refuseniks. They fought the Soviet Union, literally fought the Soviet Union, sat in prison in the Soviet Union. My father did, and my mother was involved and was constantly being dragged into the KGB in order to get information out of her. But the bottom line is she wanted out, and she wanted to be a Zionist. She wanted to come to the land of Israel. And that informs me a lot. The other thing that informs me is actually my birth date. I was born on June 26, 1976, basically the day that the Entebbe airplane, the Air France airplane, was taken hostage. And my day of my Brit Milah was on the day of its liberation. And I think that had some kind of effect on my spiritual psyche, if you will, to fight for the Jewish people land of Israel. And I guess another great thing that Rabbi Yehuda and I share is the service in the Israeli army. And I especially enjoyed my service in the reserve duty in an elite paratrooper unit, which was really amazing. I was talking about Hebron earlier, just that about 4 years ago, the organization that is dedicated to giving recognition of World Heritage Sites, which is called UNESCO, declared that the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs in Hebron is actually a Palestinian World Heritage Site in danger by Israel. And at the time, I was in the office when we first heard this, and I said to everybody in the office, I said, hey, we've got to fight this. We've got to totally push back against this. And everybody said to me, it's a waste of time. We're not going to win this vote, and we can't beat these organizations. We might as well just do what we do. And I said to them, we have got to fight, even if we lose. It'll be good for our self-respect, for our self-esteem, and we have to fight. And I initiated that fight within our offices and made video clips and other things and got donors to give us money to make great clips against UNESCO. But interestingly, that ball that we started rolling started getting bigger and bigger, became a big giant snowball. And the first thing happened was that the Deputy Foreign Minister Tzipi Chatubeli asked us for information. We gave it to her within 24 hours, made posters for her, made stuff, and she addressed down the ambassadors of different countries that belong to UNESCO. And she used our material, and it went on and on and on, and other organizations. And then we had, I just told you about Tzipi Chatubeli, but there was also Tzipi Livni, who's on the Israeli left. But she also said, hey, Marat Machpelah, the Tomb of the Fathers and Mothers, is our land, and this is wrong of UNESCO's decision. So I call that a tale of two Tzipis. And this tale of two Tzipis showed that there was consensus throughout Israel. And indeed, we got finally Prime Minister Netanyahu pulled out the 5 million shekels that Israel gave UNESCO at the time. He pulled out 1 million and gave it to the Jewish community of Hebron and our sister city Kiryat Arba. But that wasn't enough. The Trump administration, in this case, Nikki Haley, who was the ambassador to the UN, decided to pull the United States out of UNESCO because of the anti-Hebron decision. I was sitting in the audience at AIPAC when Nikki Haley announced that they're pulling out of UNESCO specifically because of the anti-Hebron decision. And I stood up and clapped. Most people, 20,000 people in the audience, didn't even understand who is UNESCO, why is it important, and where exactly the Tomb of the Fathers and Mothers are. So most Jews were disconnected from this decision, but she and the administration understood its importance. And at the same time, in Hebron, we get a chance to not only fight recalcitrant forces, but make new relationships with Arabs and other people, Palestinians, in our town and in the city and in the region of Judea, who actually see things differently, who want to cooperate with Israel, who see Israel as a very organic part of the Middle East, something that they accept and want to cooperate with for the sake of prosperity and maybe for the sake of our shared father Abraham. And so, for example, at the bat mitzvah of my daughter, which happened right before Corona, one of the heads of the local tribes, I asked him to shoot fireworks over the Tomb of the Fathers and Mothers for the bat mitzvah that we were having there, and he did it with pride and with joy and with cooperation and with respect for one another. And that was a moment where, it was like even in Hebron, nobody had ever heard of this idea to reach out to the Arabs to be part of a Jewish ceremony, a Jewish simcha, as we say. We'll get to more stuff about the future, but I think if I could say it in a very short, very tight phrase, I would say the vision for the future that I think that I represent is something that's actually a lot of people want to make it complex. A lot of people want to say things like, "Well, you don't understand," but I prefer that the things are actually simple to understand. And I think that Israel is an ethnic national state of the Jewish people. And I think that ethnic national states are beautiful things, from Iceland to Poland to Hungary to Japan. Ethnic national states is actually, I think, the backbone of a world of a peaceful global regime. And I believe that an ethnic national Jewish state surrounded by strong ethnic national Arab states working together in cooperation is the simple vision for the future. I see a railroad continuing from Istanbul, going down through Damascus, Beirut, up to northern Israel, up to Jerusalem, maybe Tel Aviv first, then Jerusalem, then down to Beersheba, then to Gaza, and from Gaza to Cairo, and then Alexandria, and the other way going to Amman, and then out through the Arabian desert, through Riyadh, and hitting finally the Gulf. And this whole region being united, but not united because we're all in some kind of massive Uber state, that we've erased our borders and identities. No, because we respect one another as tribal peoples on a land. I think that a Semitic Israel, a strong Jewish Semitic Israel surrounded by strong Arab countries, that's really the vision for the future, in cooperation, working together. And I think that we're moving ahead towards that. We've seen a great leap towards that through what's called the Abraham Accords. And I'm pushing for the Abraham Accords to become an Abrahamic alliance of countries that are like-minded, that are related genetically, ethnically, linguistically, religiously in our region, but without erasing each other's identities, respecting our borders and identities. And I think that's really the way to strive for a vision for the future. But that vision, if I would stop there, would be very, very superficial, because the real vision is having a temple in Jerusalem, which is going to be a house of prayer for all nations, and that the world will be lit up through a closer face-to-face with God. And I think really, on top of all the other great things that Israel is doing, that's its real deep mission. And I think that we're indeed heading in that direction.
Thank you, Yishai. Yehuda, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks. Well, as I was saying, I came here to really correct an injustice in my mind, the fact that my ancestors had been forcibly expelled from this land nearly 2,000 years earlier. As I said, I was born and raised in New York City, the first person in my family to be born in the United States, and the last, the last generation. My sister and I both made Aliyah. We're here now, and all of our children, and all of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren will be born here in our people's country. I know Yishai almost 20 years. I didn't come here to argue. I don't think Rav Yishai came here to argue either. The truth is, if we were in a head-on debate, I think Rav Yishai would probably throw me a serious beating. He's out there arguing with people on Twitter and forums like this all the time. He's a lawyer by training. He's a seasoned fighter, probably in his prime right now. I'm honestly not as argumentative as I once was, especially back when Rav Yishai and I spent a lot more time together. I was probably a lot more argumentative and used to love getting into these debates. These days, I really don't see that model as the most productive use of our time. I'm much more interested in a conversation where we can give our attention, where we can give our attention to some ideas that I consider to be very important. And I think based on what Yishai just said, I think he also considers a lot of those ideas as very important. And I'm hoping to really use this as an opportunity to explore some of these ideas together. I think, a lot of people who saw that this event was taking place, depending on who they were or their proximity to me or to Rabbi Yishai, some really thought that this was just going to be an echo chamber, like two guys who more or less come from the same perspective, having a conversation together with you, Adar. And some people were just like, wow, you guys, you got to beat him. So really depending on who had seen it. And I think that the way I would explain the similarities or differences between Rav Yishai and I is that we very much share an identity and maybe even an ideological framework, but we have radically different politics. And what I mean by that is, or these things that I consider to be identity. When I talk about my connection to this land, that's my identity. When I speak about, when I talk about my understanding of my people's story, my understanding of Jewish history, I think Rav Yishai and I share that. That's our identity. Our connection to this land, especially the Central Mountain region, the Judea, Samaria regions, I think that Rav Yishai and I share that. The understanding that the Jewish people coming back to life, coming back to our land, coming back to independence after thousands of years of homelessness and powerlessness, the meaning that we ascribe to that, I think we share that. But for me, that's not politics. For me, that's my identity. That's not something I can turn on or off or change. That's just who I am. That's just my starting point. That's just where I'm coming from. And in terms of where this is meant to go, Rav Yishai mentioned the temple. And one other thing I think that we share, which is very important, is that I think both of us are people who, when we pick up a Siddur and say the words in the Siddur, those are actually the things we want to see. Those are actually the things that we experience ourselves working towards between Shachrit and Mincha, between Mincha and Arvit. that these are actually the ideals and the values and the aspirations that really drive us in life. And I think that's the intention. I think that's what our sages meant to do when they created this exercise that we call tefillah. A lot of people don't know that Rabban Gamliel II, who actually kind of concretized what we call the Amidah, the central tefillah of our people, he was the son of an anti-Roman freedom fighter, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and he basically created this exercise for us, or concretized it anyway, it had already been loosely around, in order to give us a means, something that we can do to remind ourselves what our soul and what our people really want, to connect our conscious will to the will of our people going back thousands of years. And I think that that exercise has been effective both on Yishai and on myself. I think we're both people who are very much driven by that. But where we differ maybe is how we relate to contemporary issues and some of the challenges confronting our people in order to achieve all of the things that we say on the Amidah, all of the things that really drive us. So, for example, Rabbi Ishai brought up this idea of the temple, and it made me think of three kings in our history. There are really only three kings in our entire history who led the entire unified children of Israel, all 12 tribes: Shaul, David, and Shlomo. And I think that looking at Shaul, David, and Shlomo gives us a good understanding of maybe where the state of Israel is and where it can go. I very much look at Shaul as a Zionist, as an expression of Mashiach ben Yosef, somebody who's concerned with the material well-being of the Jewish people, of the children of Israel, of the Hebrews, somebody who was focused on security, uniting the people in the name of security, prosperity, being a strong nation. That was Zionism. Then you have David, someone who was also, very talented when it came to security, but also was looking towards a spiritual revival, actually wanted to give the people of Israel the values that are meant to drive us, and yearned very much to build the Beit HaMikdash. And but he couldn't do it. And I see David very much as representing the national religious camp today. Those who actually are driven by the values of our people and are still kind of living off or springboarding off of the success of the Zionists. But then you have this third stage. You have Shlomo, the universalist, or what I'd call the Hebrew universalist, who is able to finally build the Beit HaMikdash, because Shlomo wasn't just thinking about his people's narrow interests. Shlomo was thinking about the world that we want to see. And I think that ultimately, if we want to move forward, we need to get off of defense and we need to get onto offense. Meaning we need to think about what our revolution is headed towards. What do we have to say about issues impacting the rest of the world, including the Palestinians in Iran? But even the fact that, statistics I saw recently tell me that there are the 68 most wealthy people in the world together own more wealth, possess more wealth than the lowest half of the global population. Meaning, if there's a population of roughly 7.8 billion people in the world today, almost 4 billion people together, the bottom 4 billion people, have less wealth than the 68 richest people in the world. Meaning, what do we think about that? What do we think about a system that actually perpetuates such inequality? What do we think about, imperialist wars around the world? What do we think about indigenous issues, in Turtle Island and elsewhere? Like, we have to have something to say to the world about issues beyond our own narrow interests. Ultimately, we have to have a vision for what the world is supposed to look like. Every time that we've had power in history, we've actually influenced the world in a very, very positive way. Now we've come back to life after 2,000 years of powerlessness. We're used to a situation of powerlessness, and I think we've become uncomfortable with power. Now that we have power again, some of us want to use power all the time to assert our rights and assert our interests, and some of us are afraid to touch it and don't want power and just want to drop it. We need to be comfortable with power in order to get off of defense and get onto offense. Think about what the world, not just what our country, what the world is supposed to look like and the role that Israel is meant to play, in helping the world to get there. And so, when Rav Yishai spoke, there were a lot of things he said that I identify with, but also things he said that I felt we really need to move past, like this idea of kind of European ethnic nationalism. I don't think that those constructs are really helpful to us at this point. I think that Zionism, as a movement that had the challenge of bringing a dead nation back to life, something that's really unheard of in history, did use a lot of European tools, did use a lot of colonial tools in order to bring our people back to life. But now that Zionism succeeded, I would say that Zionism succeeded roughly 54 years ago. Now that we're already over half a century after the victory of Zionism, we need to create a new Jewish liberation movement that can transition us into more of a Shlomo period, where we can play a major role on the world stage and help all of humanity get to a better reality.
Thanks, Yehuda. Yishai, anything you want to follow up with that, or?
Sure. Great stuff. Very interesting. With regarding to the question of the word Zionism, when I lived in New York City, I lived in a street. It was called 189th Street, on the corner of 189th and Amsterdam. When I moved to Israel, I lived on a street close to where Yehuda lives now, and it just didn't even have a name back then. But then I moved to Jerusalem. I lived on a street called Derech Yericho, the Way of Jericho. And Jericho is where Joshua came in to the land of Israel from Jericho. He brought in the Jewish people after the Egyptian exile and slavery. He came in through Jericho. So the street was named for that because it actually led all the way down to Jericho in the end. Today I live on a street called Shivat Zion, the Return to Zion. And I've because I deal with all kinds of peoples, if they are liberal-minded Jews, if they're Europeans, if they're many ultra-Orthodox Jews. So the word Zionism is a polarizing word. I myself still like it because I like the word Zion. And to me, it's the ingathering of the exiles. We just learned about it in the Daf Yomi on page 87b of the Talmud Pesachim, that the ingathering of the exiles is really a humongous thing. And it's as though God created the world anew when the Jewish people returned to the land of Israel. And today I live on the street called Shivat Zion, which means the return to Zion. We are in the process of the return to Zion. I have found that most people would agree to that word. If the word Zionism is a type of ism that people are uncomfortable with, then the return to Zion is the time that we're living in. Now, with regarding to what Rabbi Yehuda said about having a greater role, I think it's a beautiful idea. I'm not sure about what impact we're going to have on world economics, but I'm actually interested in hearing about that. But I would say that it might be a little bit early to say that we've completed the so-called Zionist project, and I'll explain what I mean. When I go to the army to reserve duty, I have a little test that I run. I go, can you remind me who the wife of Isaac was in the Bible, in the book of Genesis? And you'd be shocked to believe that about 80% of awesome paratroopers, officers, guys who are married with kids and who take time to serve in the army, they don't know the answer. They don't know the answer of the basics of Judaism. So I think to myself, we are really far yet from actually doing what Herzl said that Zionism was really going to be all about, which is, he said, first, it's a return to Judaism. I find that my beloved Israeli brothers and sisters are just not up on it. They don't know exactly what Judaism is. They have a very bare bones understanding, and sometimes nationalism has replaced a sense of Judaism, where I think that if I use Rabbi Yehuda's model of David and Saul, I would say the first stage of the return to Zion was the building of the Jewish body, or rebuilding the Jewish body, or embodying the Jewish people in a land, in a country, etc. But the second stage, which is the Davidic stage, which is to fill the country, the peoplehood, with knowledge of our tales, of our narrative, of our history, and of a spiritual connection to God, that's very far away from being completed, very far away. We might be in the right trajectory, but we are unbelievably far away. I also purchased my wife said absolutely no cable in the house. So, but I said, but we still need to watch Israeli news. I told her it's critical that our kids see the other Israel, the real Israel. And so we got this type of antenna thing, and it gives you like 5 channels, mostly news. And you watch these news channels, and you're like, this Israel is not the Israel, not yet the Israel of the Bible. It's got that potential, but people are just not connected. And I don't only mean like fulfilling commandments. I mean even Hanukkah. Like to me, Hanukkah is such a great holiday. It's connected to everything from our rights to our land and our nationalism to our cultural independence and fight against external both oppression and also cultural incursion. And yet Hanukkah is this like, it's kind of like this, we eat a donut. If anything, we've lost Hanukkah to the Hellenists in the sense that like the whole consciousness of what Hanukkah is a very low consciousness. And my wife and I are always thinking about how to bring Hanukkah to the people. If we could only get them to like celebrate it the way it's supposed to be celebrated for a week, they'll feel the light of Jerusalem. They'll feel the power of Jewish independence and the yearning to return to our authentic culture. So, like, okay, like talking about world economics and economic disparity is good, and I'm not gonna be a stumbling block in front of that. But I just don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're there yet. Moreover, if we would fulfill our mission as a regional security provider, then we would help people like the Iranian people, one of the most oppressed groups in our whole region. I mean, does anybody even remember that 2,000 people were shot at while protesting? Young people were protesting for freedom in the streets of Tehran, and it was under the Obama administration. Nobody even gave a damn about these people. And you have, what about the Lebanese people? Palestinians living in Lebanon, Lebanese regular people who are under the thumb of Hezbollah. I mean, these people are yearning for normality, normalcy, and freedom, and we have an interest in diffusing and weakening the people who oppress them for our own security needs. So I would say, yeah, the big picture of fixing world economics, cool, I get it, and that's a very Jewish kind of impulse. But I think that if we first, at least what I'm concerned with, let's put it that way. I'm not even going to use the word we. I could say I am concerned with bringing the Tanakh and the Torah and the Bible to the Jewish people in the land of Israel, holding on to our land from all kinds of folks that want to take it away and replace us here with a replacement narrative that we're not the indigenous people of this land, that we don't have a history here, and to push back on local tyrants. I think if we got that done in my lifetime, I think we would have made a great accomplishment and move forward. And maybe only then we could start tackling the greater questions of global inequality.
Okay. So clearly, those among us who don't yet have, say, national consciousness or deep sense of Jewish identity, as Yishai and I, there's a value to educate those people. I happen to be very optimistic. I mean, even if you look at the different parties running in the current elections to the Knesset, and you don't look at how they're polling, although there's reasons to be optimistic about how the polls are shaping up. But I think even if you look at each party leader and you ask, how many children does this party leader have? How many children does Adar have? How many children does Merav Michaeli have? How many children does Nitzan Horowitz have? How many children does Bezalel Smotrich have? You see the country's moving in a specific direction, okay? And I think that as we progress, meaning as Israel moves forward, the atmosphere in the country, the education level in the country, the identity of the country is moving, I think, towards us, meaning towards the way we see Jewish history, the way we see Jewish identity, the way we see purpose. That's coming towards us, and I think that's a positive thing. But I think our obligation, those of us who are already maybe a little bit of a vanguard and have already gotten there, I think we need to think about how all of our achievements can be used as a vehicle, as a tool to achieve the mission of our people. Meaning, the way I understand the mission of the children of Israel in history is that we are meant to bring all of humanity to the awareness that we're all characters in a really great story that has an author, and that each one of us as characters is actually being played by an actor that's really just an expression of that author, and that we're all unified, meaning that we're all really one, that all of humanity is part of one organic whole. And Israel came back to life after 2,000 years in order to bring all of humankind to that awareness. And I want, those of us, I'm not talking about Bibi Netanyahu, and I'm not talking about Benny Gantz, or I'm not talking about people who are in positions of control today, but those of us who have a vision for what this country is supposed to be and have been living that vision need to think about how we can turn our state and how we can influence political figures, etc. The truth is the only party I really identify with in this election is the Levi Yehudi party, the party of Eli Yosef, that actually wants Jewish values to be expressed in the policies and institutions of the state. Like, meaning, how can this state that we've achieved and how can all the victories of Zionism be used in order to fulfill the historic mission of the children of Israel? Okay, so just want to, I know that because Yishai and I come from a very similar background, and we have a similar conception of things, and we're kind of part of the same camp within Israeli society, there might be a lot of internal language. So I just, some of the things that we've been talking about already, mentioning ideas of Shaul HaMelech, the King Shaul, or Mashiach ben Yosef. There's this idea that in our ancient writings, there's two Mashiachs, two Messiahs. There's the Mashiach ben Yosef and the Mashiach ben David. And the Mashiach ben Yosef is how, at least I and my teachers understand Zionism, that it's the material rebuilding of the Jewish people, the body, the state, the army, the economy, etc. And the Mashiach ben David is when you fill that with content, when you actually give it direction. So I agree with Rabbi Ishai. The whole nation isn't there yet. Not all of Am Yisrael is ready to think about, direction and how to use this. But those of us who are should. And we should be using our energies and our creativity, our talents, and our time to be dedicating ourselves to this question of what is this for? How are we going to use it to make the world better? To fix the world through Malchut Yisrael. Like, how is this going to make the world better than it was before we came back to life? And I think that, one of the things I see Rabbi Ishai doing sometimes, I think he mentioned earlier Japan and I think Iceland and talking about ethnic nationalisms. I'm really not interested in trying to find, the nation state that happens to have like a legitimate way of giving one group of people more rights than another group of people. I'm interested in creating new models here, new models of organizing society that can give people rights and inclusion in a way that's true to our identity, yet actually presents a new model to the world that actually can be shown as more just than the Western models of minority rights, even according to their own yardsticks. That we're here in a laboratory. That we came back to our country as a laboratory where we can take our values and our halachot and everything we've been carrying around with us for thousands of years and everything that we've been passing down from generation to generation. Now we've come back to life. When we were powerless, when we were in the diaspora, we were able to share little things with the world. Marx and Einstein and Freud were able to contribute to human development. But that's really just, in my opinion, the clearing of the throat compared to what Israel has to say now that we're actually back on our land and independent. And that's the conversation I think we need to be having. Like, what is the ideal role of a non-Jew in a Jewish society? What are our obligations to the non-Jew in our society? Should the state of Israel, should our weapons companies be arming human rights abusers or not arming human rights abusers? Next year, as Rabbi Yishai knows, is the Shemitah year. Is this going to just be about what vegetables we do or don't buy, or what fruits we do or don't buy? Or are we going to start having discussions about the socioeconomic implications of Shemitah and whether or not that should be implemented on a national level? And for a lot of these things, I acknowledge, these aren't just discussions that Rabbi Yishai and I can have. These are discussions that a lot of great minds need to really come together and not just look at the the way that these things were implemented thousands of years ago, last time we had power, that actually think about the values and ideals that are expressed by these institutions and policies, and all of the advancements that humanity has made technologically, medically, etc., since we've had power last. I mean, that's one of our disadvantages. Last time we have real examples to show of what Jewish independence looks like or what a Jewish state looks like, the world was a very different place. So now that we're back on the stage of history, thousands of years later, with all of the innovations and advancements that have taken place on the world stage, we have to think about the values that were expressed by those institutions and how those same values can be expressed through new policies that reflect our identity and our, and our aspirations for what this world can look like in the modern age.
Yishai, before you respond, I just want to kind of provide what I think might be a difference in how you view things, and feel free to respond to this as well on your next go. So, Ishai, it seems like you would like for Jews to have a stronger connection to Judaism, the religious aspects of Judaism, and it seems like Yehuda agrees with that. But for him, it's deeper. He wants a restructuring of the country, both politically and economically, and culturally. What, Yehuda, is it right? Am I getting your position right on this? That you're really looking for a restructuring of the country to kind of get rid of the Western ideals and values, at least the ones you disagree with, and kind of bring it more back to our traditional Jewish roots?
Well, I didn't say that, but what I would say is, this Shabbat, we're reading Parshat Truma, and this deals with the construction of the Mishkan. And a lot of the Mishkan, the tabernacle that Israel built after the revelation at Har Sinai, was built with gold that we took out of the land of Egypt. Now, we'll see in a couple of weeks that a lot of that gold we took out of the land of Egypt also went towards the golden calf. Meaning, gold in our Torah is actually not really a metaphor for material wealth. That's usually silver in our Torah. Gold is most often used as a metaphor for culture and values. We took gold out of Egypt, and some of that gold went to the Mishkan, which is an expression of our identity and conducive to our mission, and some of that gold went to the golden calf, which was obviously a betrayal of our identity and a betrayal of our mission to a certain extent. Now, whenever we come back from the diaspora, we come back with gold. Both Rabbi Ishai and I came from the United States. Other people in Israeli society come from other parts of the world, and we all came back with gold. And we have to sift that gold to see what actually is conducive and what is not. Most nations, when they achieve their liberation, they have what's called a post-colonial experience. They have a post-colonial conversation where they actually think about what is our identity, what happened to us, what was done to us, how are we now going to create the type of society that expresses our identity in its policies and institutions. Israel has never had that conversation, partially because of security threats and different insecurities and trauma that we just didn't want to deal with, but we have to deal with it. And if we haven't dealt with it yet, we have to deal with it now. And I think that's what you're alluding to, Adar, when you talk about the Western features of Israeli society. I think that Israel, we do have a Westernized ruling class, and we do have a certain class of people that want to be part of the West, yet at the same time, Israel is a very Semitic country, and the Jewish people are a very Semitic people. And we have to actually ask ourselves, what did we come back for? What is our society supposed to look like? What values, what identity is supposed to be expressed through the policies and institutions of this state? We haven't had that conversation yet, and I think we have to have it now. I think Israeli society, in order to move forward, needs to be able to have a real conversation where we address our own trauma, because we have lots of trauma, especially Ashkenazim. We have 2,000 years of trauma that we need to unpack and get straight from in order for us to be able to move forward in a healthy way. Like I said before, from defense to offense.
Thanks, Yehuda. Yishai, does that resonate with you, or is that part of it less important?
Unpack there. So I'll just kind of focus on a few different points. First thing, just to clear something up, I think that calling Israeli ethnic nationalism a byproduct of Europeanism, European nationalism, is a tad unfair, because the real truth is is that European nationalism is a byproduct of people looking back into the Bible and looking back all the way to King David and being like, oh, an ethnic tribe got together, these 12 tribes got together on their land. They shared a language, a calendar, a coinage, a history, a culture, a religion, and they're on their land, they're tied into their land, and there's nothing more beautiful than a people on their land doing their cultural thing. And if you look back into the American writings, like they saw themselves as learning a lot from the Jewish experience, from the ancient Jewish experience. So in many ways, you ever like talk to people and you say something about Mashiach or Messiah, and they say to you, oh, that's a Christian concept. You're like, dude, Christianity picked that up from Judaism, or I don't know, Ramadan is like a fasting month. Where do you get that? Oh, you got it from Judaism, the idea of fasting and cleansing yourself. So, like, we're the Papa and Mama. Our historical experience is where that comes from, and it went a long cycle, and it got back to us. I don't think there's anything overly Western about King David having a kingdom in this land, and us yearning for our third commonwealth in this land. So that's just one perspective on that. Now, with regarding to what Yehuda's saying, I think it's all, again, like I said before, I think it's all beautiful stuff, but I don't always know personally what is the great restructuring that has to happen, and I'm sometimes suspicious of it because I don't know if mankind always knows what that great restructuring is supposed to be. My parents came from a world of communism where really the Jews in the Soviet Union were one of the main peoples behind the restructuring of that society. Now, my mom and my father, alav shalom, never told me, you got to read some of that Marx stuff. It really worked out well for us. Most of the time, they're like, no, this was a very destructive, freedom-eating idea, and don't go there. So huge restructuring can work, cannot work. I don't know. What I do know is that there are steps to be taken, process steps to be taken, and those process steps, I believe, will lead us in the right direction. Let me just give you like an example of not knowing. I grew up, I was born here, as I said, in the mid-'70s in Israel, and my parents were scientists. Did we know back then in the 70s and 80s that Israel was going to become this country, that technology was something that was such a driver of both the economics and the mentality of Israel today? Like Jews love science, from the Rambam and to the Ramban. They were great doctors. And the issue of science is something that calls to Jews. My mom always said to me, what is science? It's actually just studying, walking in the footsteps of God, finding out the secrets that he embedded into this world, finding out his knowledge. Now, since the Jewish people have started coming back to the land of Israel, which I like to put it at the mid 16th century, the 1550s, from when the Arizal called the Jewish people, Arizal and the group of Kabbalists called the Jewish people back to the land of Israel. For the last 500 years, Jews have been coming back to the land of Israel. And the more we come back to the small corner in the Middle East, the more incredible knowledge has come into this world. And today, the Jewish people are some of the great perpetuators of that knowledge. I was on an airplane to San Francisco to do some fundraising for the Jewish community of Hebron, and I heard Israelis talking, because they were going out there to Silicon Valley, talking about high-tech stuff, and I saw how incredibly enmeshed they were in the ability to create technology that would serve the world. Now, I'm not one to say that that's our raison d'etre, to send technology into the world. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is you don't always know exactly what your role is going to be. You don't always know that you're going to create something that's going to change the world in a way that wasn't so expected. I don't know exactly where Israel is going to change the world. Is it going to affect global economics? I really don't know. Is it going to affect global medicine? That's for sure. Is it going to connect people more? Is it going to make life safer? Yeah, I think that Israel is really doing all that stuff. So I don't really know for sure how Israel is going to light up the world. But I do know certain process steps, and I'll give you an example. Like, I believe when the Torah tells me that one of the most important things that should happen is that the Jewish people should come up to Jerusalem 3 times a year. That's what the Torah tells me. It says it over and over again in different ways. It says, come up to Jerusalem 3 times a year and make sure that everybody comes in. So I'm thinking to myself, how do we use the modern state of Israel to facilitate this thing that God says, do this? He doesn't tell me how to restructure global economics. He says to me, bring the Jewish people 3 times a year in Jerusalem, and nobody will covet your land, and there'll be blessings in the land if you come to serve God 3 times a year in Jerusalem. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm always thinking about that. I'm thinking, imagine if we dropped airport taxes, and fuel taxes and everything, and said to El Al, during the 3 festivals, we want you to make flights cheap, not expensive. We want you to drop it to a $500 price point. Let's figure out a way how to do that to help you get more people into the land, not less by choking the price, driving it up to like $2,000 a ticket. Make it cheap so that every college kid, Jewish college kid in America might say, you know what, instead of going to Acapulco, I'm going to go to Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv for spring break. Okay, if I help the Jewish people come back to Jerusalem, and the book of Zechariah tells us, towards the end of the book, tells us that the Gentiles will come on Sukkot. Help them come to serve the God of Israel in Jerusalem by making cheap hotels, cheap flights. By the way, how many tourists come a year to Israel? About 4 million. How many tourists come every single year to Turkey? Almost 52 million. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I've got ways, biblical ways to bring people to Jerusalem, to bring more tourists to Israel, help make things a little bit cheaper and not choke it in the kind of old Middle East style, but rather, open the markets up, and there'll be a blessing through that. More people will see the God of Israel. More people will come to Jerusalem and see the great light. There'll be good things. How exactly what exact economic model the world needs, I don't know. But I do know that people need to come to Yerushalayim. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. I guess one of the ways that, when I was finishing college, I had to decide what my next degree was going to be. And I decided to go to law school. And my main drive for going to law school, even though it was not my tendency to study law, my main drive was, how do we make things practical? How do we use the mechanisms of law and state to make a great dream come true? How do I get enmeshed in this system and make it holier and better and more of God's vision? And so that's exactly what I've been trying to do all these years, is to make it more practical, more on the ground. And that's the process that I see happening. And I think it's a process of blessing. But the basic things of helping Jewish people know more about their heritage, and you used the word religion earlier, Adar. The word religion isn't exactly the right word, because religion is it's kind of a cold word. What we're talking about is both identifying with our national stories, with the foundational stories, and it's also about spirituality. Imagine if Tel Aviv decided down the line that it would be the first city to keep the Shabbat, because the people of Tel Aviv need a break from smoking, need a break from driving, need a break from the hustle and bustle, need to turn off their phones, go to the park and have like yoga, meditation, prayer, the prayer that Rabbi Yehuda was talking about. Imagine if that great lively city would actually shut down to recoup. The whole world would come to see this amazing city and its like beautiful Sabbath keeping. I could just see the whole of Tel Aviv walking the streets, not smoking, coming back to spirituality, coming back to family, detoxing from digitality. I don't know if there's a word like that, but I made it up. And those are steps, concrete steps that I see in pushing that vision forward.
Thank you, Yishai. Yehuda, I will give you an opportunity to respond, but we are closing in on an hour, so I do want to start addressing a new topic. So I'm going to ask a question. If there's something you feel like you do need to respond to, go for it. Just include your answer in this next question. So, just to summarize, it really seems like Yehuda is, focused, has like a grandiose vision of what we could do, who we can be. And Yishai is more focused on more like pragmatic steps forward. Now, I don't think this is even an area where common ground necessarily needs to be met, because I think leaders, you need different types of leaders, some that are going to tell you what you could do today and some who are going to try to build you a vision for the future. And Yehuda, it's not for no reason that you have a magazine and a movement called Vision. It makes sense after hearing, what we just heard. So I do want us to start addressing what many would view to be the camel in the room. You both agree that you're in agreement that you want the land to remain whole. From the river to the sea, it will be Israel.
Yes.
From the river to the sea, there happens to be around 40% of another national identity that also have national aspirations, the Palestinian people. How do we address their rights and national aspiration with keeping Israel whole.
Is it okay if I begin by responding to what Rabbi Yishai had already said, and kind of bring
go for
your question towards the end? First of all, I do want to acknowledge that what Rabbi Yishai said before about European nationalism actually being based on the ancient Hebrews is correct, or at least my wife, who got her master's in the study of nationalism, tells me it is absolutely correct. But I do think that there's a danger in us using, us taking the knockoff brand that was based on, even if it was based on us taking the knockoff brand and using it ourselves, ultimately results in us playing something that's not exactly ours. Okay, and I think it's true. Even I heard Yishai mention the word prayer before, which kind of like rubbed me the wrong way, because I was very careful to avoid that term prayer. I don't think we pray. We lehitpalel. It's something very different. The Christian world prays, and they do something different from what we do. Just like I don't think that the Western concept of God has much to do with Yudke Vavke, with the what we consider the Creator. I think that we need to be very careful not to utilize, and it's hard when we're using the English language, but not to utilize the appropriated aspects of our ancient identity that Western civilization has used. We need to be careful not to take those things, but actually to go back to the originals of what was actually ours when rebuilding our civilization. And I think that's very important. Also, I definitely have a lot of respect for Rabbi Yishai's parents and their struggle against the Soviet regime, especially that regime's suppression of the Jewish people at a certain point in time. I don't suggest recreating the Soviet Union. I do suggest looking at every revolution and every revolutionary experience in history and trying to understand what was right, trying to understand what was wrong, and figure out how we can do better, in terms of us being able to move forward. So I just want that to be very clear. I also want to add something. Rabbi Yishai mentioned the Arizal, and that there have been a few hundred years of the Jewish people coming back to the land of Israel. I think it's more than that, and there's a huge gap in a lot of our knowledge. When we learn this history or when we understand this history, I think it needs to be understood that there were roughly 24 Jewish liberation movements, attempts to actually restore Jewish independence to this land before and after the Arizal. Meaning roughly every century, sometimes twice a century, there was a practical attempt to restore Jewish independence to Palestine. Zionism happens to be the movement that succeeded. So we remember that one, and sometimes we even use this word Zionism to anachronistically kind of apply to all the liberation movements that came before it. But I think it's important that we understand the historical context, and we should understand our identity as a people that self-identified as refugees for centuries, passed on from generation to generation this idea that we're going to come back to our land, we're going to come back to independence. Every wedding, every Pesach Seder, every major experience a Jewish family had, whether in Morocco or Poland or Yemen or Canada, and we told ourselves we're coming back, and many times we practically tried. And I think that part of our history needs to be on the table. I think people need to understand that this is not something that we forgot about for 2,000 years, or it's not something that we relegated to spirituality or religion or whatever for 2,000 years. This is something that we actually practically tried to restore many, many times, and many times we failed, and many times we died failing. But finally, we did come back, and we did liberate our land from British rule, and we did raise a Hebrew flag over this land. Now, when we talk about our vision for the world, I think it's correct. We do need to start local, and that maybe gets us into more your question, Adar. Before we talk about restructuring the economies of the world, maybe we should talk about the non-Jews in our society, the Palestinians who live in this land with us, or the asylum seekers from African countries, or the Drusim, or the Filipino workers who are exploited in our society. I think that before we even get into that conversation, though, there's something I want to make very clear. My approach, and I think the real Jewish approach to tochacha, to criticism, is introspection. And too often, when we're criticized either as individuals or as a people, we tend to become defensive instead of actually thinking about the criticism. But I really do believe that the healthiest and most authentically Jewish response to criticism really is introspection. We need to think about the criticisms that we're hearing. And I think we need to think, just like that's true on a personal level, I think it's true on a national level. We need to think about everything that the Palestinians are saying, that their supporters are saying, that the BDS movement is saying, and ask ourselves, well, first of all, is this true? Second of all, if it's true, is it correct? Meaning, is this an expression or a betrayal of our identity that they're criticizing? And even if it's not true, we should ask ourselves, why are people seeing us this way? Are we behaving in such a way? Because there's also a concept of Marat Ein. Like, are we behaving in such a way that causes people to see us as something other than we're not? I've said many times that the Jews in Judea are not the Americans in Afghanistan or the French in Algeria. The problems arise when we begin to behave like the Americans in Afghanistan or the French in Algeria or any other example of imperialism or settler colonialism. At the end of the day, Israel's military occupation of the West Bank and many of the colonial structures that exist in the West Bank and oppress the Palestinian population actually undermine the Jewish people's very real natural connection to Judea and Samaria. And I think that our behavior, our policies, and I think those policies, what Rav Yishai mentioned before about some of his friends in Miluim not knowing who the wife of our ancestor Yitzchak was, I think that's a symptom of what I'm talking about, just like the occupation's a symptom of what I'm talking about. Both are betrayals of our identity. Both result from us adopting a Western paradigm. Earlier, Rabbi Ishai mentioned Tzipi Livni, and he called her a leftist. I don't know if you remember Adar, but Rabbi Ishai called Tzipi Livni a leftist. And that caught my attention only because I think this is the only country in the world where somebody like Tzipi Livni could be called a leftist. I don't know if anybody with her politics would be called a leftist anywhere else in the world. And I think it's a result of us using, like I said before, foreign frameworks that are inauthentic to us. This idea of left and right, this idea of religious and secular, don't really fit our identity. I think when we talk about the divisions in Israeli society, we can say that there are Israelis who are living Jewish history and who are relating to a lot of the contemporary challenges within the context of our historical experience and the wisdom of our prophets and sages and things our ancestors had to struggle with, and applying those lessons to modern times. Those are people who are, I think, 100% fully living in Jewish history. And I think there are people who are completely living in Western civilization in 2021, and that's their ideological paradigm. And I think, by the way, there's value to both. I think one is we can call Yehuda and one we can call Yosef, right? And there's a value to Yehuda and there's a value to Yosef. But ultimately, if you look at almost any contentious issue in Israeli society today, it comes down to a conflict between Jewish nationalism and Western liberalism. Almost every conflict in Israeli society is an expression of this friction between Jewish nationalism and Western liberalism. And I think ultimately what we need to do is transcend that friction, or that ostensible friction, with what I call Hebrew universalism. Because the problem, I think one of the things that prevents a lot of the Israelis of Yosef, and by the way, some of the Yosef people have kippot, and some of them are actually Roshei Yeshiva. I think you can definitely meet, even in Gush Etzion, right? In Judea, you can meet Roshei Yeshiva, heads of yeshivot, big rabbanim with beards and kippot, who are 100% Yosef, who are living in the ideological paradigm of Western civilization in the modern age, right? And are turned off by, and I know Yishai knows exactly what I'm talking about because he went to Yeshiva University and probably studied with many of these rabbis. And they're turned off by what they see as like an ugly Jewish nationalism. Because Jewish nationalism doesn't address the things that are important to those who are concerned with human rights and social justice, etc. And I think our Torah actually does. I think our identity actually does. I think our prophets and sages actually do have answers to these questions. And I think that that's part of the transition from narrow Jewish nationalism to Hebrew universalism. So in terms of moving forward, I do want to talk about practical steps. I do think one of the major practical steps is just getting free, not just ideologically and culturally, but also militarily and economically from the United States, to be an independent country that's not a vassal of the US and doesn't behave or see itself or function as an extension of US power in the Semitic region. I think the post-colonial conversation that I spoke about earlier is a major practical step that we need to take now. But the third practical step, I think, relates directly to your question, Adar, and that's the question of Palestinians. Like, we need to be able to reconcile with the Palestinians. And I actually see Rabbi Yishai as the key to making that happen, because I think he's, in his essence, exactly the type of Jew who our neighbors should be meeting, who the Palestinians should be meeting. I think one of the problems is that until now, Israel's relationship with the Palestinians and with the Arab world has been monopolized by Yosef. And Yosef is great at many things, building economies, building armies, building a state. That was Zionism. But our face to our neighbors, our face to the Palestinians, our face to the rest of the Semitic region shouldn't be Yosef. It should be Yehuda, and maybe sometimes even Shimon. And I think that Rav Yishai is exactly the type of Jew who the Palestinians should be meeting. And I know that he does. And I've even had the merit to be connected to some of those engagements before. But one of my critiques of the way in which those meetings often go down is I get the sense, I'll use, Yishai, I'll use your words. You often use the term narrative warfare. This idea that it's our narrative, the Jewish narrative, against the Palestinian narrative. And we have to win and they have to lose. Or our narrative, our story has to win and their story has to lose. And I think that's counterproductive, because at the end of the day, first of all, I think that their narrative is true. I think what they're saying is often historically true, or at least when they're talking about themselves. And I think what we're saying is true when we're talking about ourselves. I think we both get it wrong when we talk about the other, right? You have, we learn, actually, Rav Kook teaches in the Mamar Dat Elokim that we all live in our subjective perceptions of reality. The way we perceive reality impacts how we experience reality. That's one of the reasons we say, Baruch Atah Hashem all day. The more we say that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is abundantly present in our lives, the more we experience him as abundantly present in our lives. But our perception impacts our experience also in politics, also in history. And I think that what the Palestinians say they've experienced in this land over the last 100 years, 150 years, in their encounter with Zionism is very true. It's true that we came here, the Zionists came here using colonialist tools, using colonial methodology. It's true that there were a lot of misunderstandings, and it's true that the British Empire, which ruled our land until we forced them to leave, were really, really good at dividing and ruling native populations. And they played each one of us against the other. Doesn't mean that the Palestinians were wrong, doesn't mean that we were wrong, but we both made mistakes, and we both have to account for those mistakes today. But we more than them only because we have power. Right now, we're in a situation where we've both made mistakes, we've both suffered, but we're ruling over them. We have power over them. We have control over them. That means the ball's in our court. That means it's up to us to really make the first move towards building trust and creating the type of reality that I think we ultimately both want to see, which is one country between the river and the sea, including Gaza, that can actually create a model of minority rights that makes us a light unto nations, that actually inspires the rest of the world, and doesn't look at countries like Japan or Finland or anywhere else to say, hey, look, they get away with not giving rights to that group. Let's actually try to give rights. Let's actually try to grant inclusion and equality to the Palestinian people living under us in a way that works, in a way that's an expression of our identity, in a way that allows them to express their identity and allows us to move forward together and build this country together.
Thanks, Yehuda. Yishai, the floor is yours, friend.
Well, it's great stuff that Rav Yehuda said. and inspiring in many ways, of liberation of language and liberation of words, and not to behave like a colonialist. And I really appreciate those thoughts. A few caveats. Our face as Israel has always been both to the east and the west. So the Torah will give us the story of Ishmael, which relates to the Arabs. That's to the east. And there was, at the end of Isaac's and Ishmael's life, actually at the very end of Abraham's life, they buried, Isaac and Ishmael both buried their beloved shared father together in the tomb of the fathers and mothers. And there was, our sages teach us that there was a reconciliation that happened at that moment. And our prophets tell us, Valu Mosheim Beharisav, that at the end of time, in the Messianic period, there's going to be also a reconciliation between the Jewish people and the mountain of Esav. What is that pasuk? Why did that slip my mind? Anyway, the verse will come back to me in a second. In any case, the verse there, the meaning of it is that in the Messianic times we'll come back to another understanding, a better understanding with Esav. There's actually a verse all the way in the beginning of Genesis which says, Yafet Elohim leYafet vishkon bo alei Shem, that God sees the beauty of Japhet, but will dwell in the tents of the Semites, of Shem. And the rabbis say, Yafyuto shel Yafet be'ohalei Shem. The beauties of Rome, of Japhet, will dwell within the house of the Hebrews, the house of the Semites. And there will be, again, a kind of bringing together of both West and Israel, and then beforehand, East and Israel. And that's why God put us smack in the middle of East and West, right? He put us smack in the middle. Even our calendar system is lunar like the Muslims and solar like the Western world. Like we have a mixture of these things, and we're these people that kind of represent everybody. One of the great disagreements that Rabbi Yehuda and I have is he has a kind of a sense that he wants to throw off America, and they're making us into a puppet state, and I understand that, and I myself have written articles that Israel should be more independent of America and certainly not see itself as a puppet state. But on the other hand, the relationship with the West has always been there, always will be there. Let's remember even the very name of the Jewish High Court, according to the tradition of the sages, Sanhedrin. It's a Roman word. It's a Roman word that we've adopted in order to call our Supreme Court filled with rabbis. It's a Roman word. What about our calendar? It's got names of Babylonian gods as our calendar. We remember these things. In some ways, in some weird ways, we're actually the people that keep ancient cultures alive. Weirdly, we bring the Romans with us. Weirdly, we bring the Babylonians with us in time. We're the only ones that remember their good and their bad and kind of keep their we're the only ones who talk about Assyrians. Nobody else talks about Assyrians, but we're like, there was an Assyrian king and he did this and he did that. And we're talking about Sancherib, of course. And so you have, we have something about the Jewish people that faces both ways. And to kind of flop off America and say Ichsa and all of that, I just think that that's wrong. And I think it's a mistake because there's a lot of people there. Now, for example, Rabbi Yehuda didn't like the word prayer. I get what he's saying. It's a different type of thing, and the word faith is not the word emunah. But that's true in all translations. If you translate between English and Russian, the same problems happen. It's just they don't always work together. Translations mean different things in different languages. But our purpose is to try to find common ground with people that want to come closer. People want to come closer to the God of Abraham. Our job is to bring them closer. I agree with you, not through being a vassal state, but certainly through relationships. We've always had those relationships. We always will have those relationships. That's the real thing. Now, with regarding to the Palestinian narrative, let's just be real for a second, okay? We're living now in the beginnings of the 21st century. The 20th century saw the greatest propagandists that ever lived use all their power to try to erase Israel and the Jewish people. So we're talking about the Nazis. And they're, speaking of Joseph, there was another Joseph. His name was Joseph Goebbels, and he was a genius at creating a narrative that the Jewish people are some kind of vermin. It was a kind of full-blown blood libel on the national level and maybe even international level. He got so many countries and peoples to get into that mode of destroying the vermin that is the Jewish people. And so that was a one hell of a piece of propaganda that turned half of the world against the Jewish people. You know, the Romanians, the Estonians, and so many other people did unspeakable things to the Jewish people through this propaganda. Then people like my family fell under the prison of the Soviet Union, and they fought against religion, against God. Stalin wanted to burn away every last vestige of Judaism and called religion, you know, the opiate of the masses. That's Marxism, but made that come into play. And this was a huge propaganda machine to try to erase Jewish people's identity. And after that came the jihadist contingent, people like Haji Amin al-Husseini, who was a proto-Nazi in 1929 and stirred up a horrible riot against the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And 67 Jews were murdered in Hebron. It was all the same. It was Nazism. It was jihadism, because it wasn't just about, oh, these people are invading us. It was about the fact that we're religiously second rate. It's called din el batil in Arabic, which means that jihadism sees the Jewish people as a forgotten religion that's been superseded, and therefore if they become too uppity, you got to crush them. And this was taught to millions and millions of people. Just look at the videos of speeches by people like Nasser and throngs of tens of thousands of people calling for the death of Israel. Palestinianism is the child of Haji Amin al-Husseini and Yasser Arafat. These are people who we know worked with Soviet KGB agents to develop an alternative narrative trying to replace the Jewish people. And Yasser Arafat was the one that said that the war for Palestine will be won in the bedrooms. We have to outpopulate them. And we know from books like From Time Immemorial that the majority of Palestinians that are here today came in the 1850s and onward. And we know that they were small, groups of mini little cities, nothing like we have the great, refugee status of today. And we know that the Palestinian Authority and Hamas teaches children day in and day out to hate Israel. I'm speaking to many Arabs, ones that are today anti the Palestinian Authority, or just ones that tell me the way it is honestly. And they say to me, they teach us hate with our mother's milk. It's in our television. It's in our textbooks. I see it all the time, and people show it to me, what it really looks like. So to then willy-nilly say, well, what it's really about is that the Jewish people are occupying their land, and they see it, the way that they perceive these things as an occupation, is such a erasure of what really is going on around here, which is a wholesale indoctrination against us. And I'm talking like a Russian Jew. And maybe that's a big part of it, because I really in my house education, I'm a Russian Jew and not an American Jew. I speak English because I came to America later on, but I don't perceive ways, like when I hear Rabbi Yehuda speaking, I hear more of an American attitude, ironically, than a Russian attitude. Our Russian attitude is, this is our tribal land. People are trying to take it over. They use all kinds of fancy words like human rights and all this kind of stuff, but they lie all the time. People like Isa Amru in Hebron. He's a bold-faced liar. He talks about apartheid in Hebron, in the Jewish section of Hebron, where Arabs can't walk in certain parts, but he doesn't mention that Jews are not even allowed in the ethnically cleansed areas of Hebron under the Palestinian Authority, which they say without mixing words. They say they want to keep it Judenrein. They want to keep it clear of Jews. He doesn't talk about the real apartheid in the region. So yeah, I see some of these efforts to besmirch us, to tell us to use the word occupation. What is the word occupation? It doesn't mean that there's a military there. It means that we're not from here. And so I'm always amazed that Rabbi Yehuda is willing to use this word occupation, where that word is the word of the enemies that try to say, we're not from here, we're foreigners, we're thieves, we're abusers. Now, could our army behave better? Should it be a more civil administration there? Should there be no walls and all that? Absolutely, I agree with that. If we would crush jihadism, which is the movement to try to destroy Israel and suppress other peoples, sure, there would be much more peace. If Israel would be clear about what are the laws for Gentiles, non-Jews, other tribes to live in our land, to be allied with us, to respect our law, like, for example, the Druze, and then they would receive rights after fulfilling their obligations. Absolutely, I'm all for that. I'm not racist against Arabs, God forbid. I respect them very much and understand that this is their region. In fact, I think that we should behave like them. And the way that Rabbi Yehuda is speaking, that's to me sounds like a kind of colonialism. Where in the Arab world do you accept the other people's narrative and share the narrative and figure out a way for everybody to live all together? No, this is our tribal land, and we have to push back on all kinds of fancy efforts to delegitimize our narrative and our history and our story. Does that mean that no Arabs deserve rights here? Of course they deserve rights. Certainly civil rights and personal rights and freedoms of speech, which actually Israel is the only guarantor of in this whole region. But if somebody tells me that they have national rights to this land, I say, hell no. If somebody says to me that he also has a right for national self-determination in this land, I say, hell no. And I think that speaking in clarity is where health comes in. And I think to forget where we're coming from. I have like an obsession. I'm constantly interested in World War II and the Holocaust and the propaganda and all the things that were pulled on us. Let's not go down there. Let's not, the 11th commandment in this region is Al tiye frayer, like don't be a sucker. I think it's, by the way, the pasuk is Va'alu Moshim lehar Tzion lishpot et har Esav. It came back to me that there will be a detente between Esav and Israel. What's that?
A judgment of Western civilization.
Fine, a judgment, but also the rabbis say a reconciliation, though, because they'll accept our judgment. I hear what you're saying, but to lop off the West and say we're not talking to you, I don't agree with that, and I just don't think that that's the trajectory of history in any case. My final word is I want to just bring it down to one realpolitik point, which I want to credit to my good friend Alex Trayman, who said something to me that really was very interesting to me. He said, President Trump, who I think was truly pro-Israel in his heart, he, in his kind of last act as president, actually caused us to pivot more to the East, sensing that our relationship with America and the so-called West was becoming degraded, was going to go back to more like Obamaism, and kind of in his last act, passed the ball to us and said, look to the East, make regional partnerships. I'm signing off here, and I don't think America is going to be your friend as much. And I know people don't like to hear that, but I think that Alex's point is that a true pro-Israel person said to the Jewish people, make more alliances with the East, make more alliances with your Arab cousins. That's where you need to go right now. And I think that is where we're going. And I certainly agree with Yehuda Rav Yehuda that we should not be a puppet state. And I think that is what's happening now with more formidable military strength and hopefully leading towards spiritual strength as well.
Thank you. Yehuda, all you. We're gonna just real quick. You'll have an opportunity to respond, and then we're gonna do final thoughts, and then we're gonna move it over to the after party in Discord. I know that the community, I see them in chat. They really want to get in on the questions and on the dialogue. So we're gonna start wrapping up.
Okay. First of all, I think Yishai brought up some interesting points. First of all, regarding our calendar, it's true that our calendar is a combination of lunar and solar, but we have to keep in mind that it's primarily lunar with some solar adjustments. At the end of the day, we want to be connected to the entire world, including the West. I don't disagree, but we need to know who we are first. And again, as I don't think there's disagreement, not as a vessel. We can't have a real relationship with the West when we think in terms of some kind of mythic Judeo-Christian civilization. There's no Judeo-Christian civilization. There is a Christian civilization which appropriated our civilization and tried to replace us for many, many centuries. And there's our civilization which is coming back to life and in many ways might actually eclipse them. You mentioned the wife of our ancestor Yitzhak, her name was Rivka, and she had Nevuah. And in her Nevuah was that the children of Esav, the Western civilization, and the children of Israel can't both simultaneously be dominant on the world stage. And I think with the rebirth of the children of Israel, we see an eclipse of the West and a weakening of Christianity and maybe other features of that civilization as we progress, as we advance. In terms of our history and the Palestinian history, I really see what just happened, a lot of what Ishai just said, as really that defensiveness and that kind of defensive nationalism that I spoke about earlier. I don't want to get into the question over whether or not a book like From Time Immemorial should be taken seriously. But I think that, we need to be able to look at, not dismiss the criticisms, not say it's all propaganda, but to understand that there were many people living here. It might be true that, 120 years ago, there were Arabs living in Jaffa and in Akko and in Beersheba and in Tzfat and in Hebron and in, and in Shechem and in other parts of the country. And maybe there was nothing that really united those communities that they didn't also share in common with Arabs living in Cairo or Baghdad or Damascus. But I would say certainly in the last 100 years, there have been shared experiences that all those communities had that unified them and turned them into Palestinians, made them Palestinians. And that is their experience with Zionism. That's their experience with what they experienced as a bunch of people coming from Europe using tools of colonialism, in many ways collaborating with the British Empire and completely disrupting their civilization, their way of life. It doesn't mean that we intended to do it. I think in many ways we were just insensitive. And in many ways they were insensitive back. And then violence started breaking out and the British used that. And the British kept pitting us against each other. And the only group I know of that actually tried to prevent the British from pitting us against each other was the Lehi, the Lochanei Chilut Yisrael, the Fighters for the Freedom of Israel, that actually did have Palestinian members and actually did reach out to the country's Arab population, even on the eve of the 1948 war, and tried to prevent a Jewish-Arab conflict and keep the Semitic peoples unified against British imperialism. But for the most part, we fell into the trap. The Zionist leaders fell into the trap. The Arab leaders fell into the trap. And we're still in the trap. We're still in the trap. And that's, I guess, kind of what I mean. We need to understand if we're going to have a healthy relationship with Palestinians, with the rest of the Semitic region, with the Western world, with Europe, with the United States, with anybody, we need to understand how the game works. We need to understand how imperialism works. We need to understand the ways in which we're controlled. We're not controlled today by the Palestinians. Our policies aren't controlled by the Palestinians. Our economy isn't controlled by the Palestinians. We're controlled by Washington. Us fighting Palestinians or trying to delegitimize their struggle or their story or invalidate their pain, because the pain is real, isn't going to free us. What's going to free us is actually acknowledging where we might not yet be acting as ourselves. I'm not saying this from a place of weakness or some American Jew. I'm saying this as somebody who wants to advance our revolution forward. And advancing forward isn't always achieved with brute strength. That's what I meant before about misusing power. I come as somebody with power. When I meet with Palestinians, I don't bring a gun to the meeting. I don't try to flex my muscles. I don't try to show them how powerful I am, because that doesn't need to be said. Right? I step in as somebody who's confident in his own power. If somebody wants to hurt me, put him in the ground. You don't need an ideology for that. You don't need a political platform to take out somebody who's trying to hurt you. The question is, where do we want to go? And why did the Kadosh Baruch Hu create the situation where we have Palestinians living with us, and we're obviously supposed to learn something from this experience. We're obviously supposed to become more ourselves from this experience. The question is, how is that going to happen? I don't think it's going to happen by denying their story and being defensive and saying, no, we're okay, we've done everything right. How could we even claim that? If we believe, if we know about the Alta Lena, and we know about the Saison, it's really hard to believe that the same Zionist leaders responsible for the Alta Lena and the Saison weren't also responsible for the Nakba. Is that really hard to imagine? Like, take responsibility. No, that was the real difference, Father, between David and Shaul. Taking responsibility, owning up. It doesn't mean retreating. It doesn't mean being weak. It doesn't mean making yourself vulnerable. In my opinion, it's an expression of strength. You take responsibility, you own up where you're wrong, you acknowledge it, and you try to make things right in a way that advances your struggle forward. And that's what I think we need to do. And that's why I think it's so important that we listen to Palestinians and we hear their stories and we hear their experiences. And yeah, it's true. I want Jews to be able to live in 100% of Hebron, not just the tiny sliver we're allowed to live in now. But I don't want that to be threatening to Palestinians. And the relationship you have with great families like Jabri, I want you to have those relationships with all the Palestinians. I want them all to experience the positive. That's the future we should, as the strength, not as people who are weak. By the way, the main difference, you spoke before about the way Jews were treated in the Islamic world, which I don't think is as bad as we're treated by Europe, but you know what? It's not a competition. I don't want anyone treating us badly, but the real difference between the relationship we've had with the Islamic world until now and the relationship we can have with the Islamic world today comes down to one factor. The fact when that happened, they treated us that way, dhimmis or whatever, they were able to do it because they were able to do it. They were able to do it because we had no power. And today we have power, and they can't do it. The relationship we have with them today will be a different relationship. It's a different relationship because they can't. And if they try to treat us that way today, they'll get hurt. That's the reality. And you don't have to say that to them. They know that. And we see it. Maybe, look, I have my inner conflicts over the Abraham Accords and over a lot of what Trump has done here. I'm not interested in Lockheed Martin getting rich off the Emirates getting these planes and Bahrain getting that. And I'm interested in real peace. Common values, common vision for the region, protecting the region from outside interests. That includes definitely American weapons companies or oil companies. But I do want real peace. I want real unity in the Semitic region. And of course, I want them to recognize us as an organic part of the region. But in order for them to be able to recognize us as an organic part of the region, we have to act like it. And when I talk about occupation, I'm not just, taking their word and there's a real thing going on. There's a reality in which millions of human beings are living under a military bureaucracy, our military bureaucracy, that controls almost every aspect of their lives. And we're not going to be recognized as belonging here until we stop behaving like we don't. That is the way, Western powers behave in the countries they occupy. Let's behave like natives. Maybe then they'll see us as natives. And if we have to fight, we'll fight. But it requires us to go from defense to offense. Think about what kind of society we want to be, what that really looks like. And obviously, I think in terms of moving forward, practically speaking, in terms of moving towards a one-state solution where we can live together, happy in the same country, both experiencing victory according to our own narratives. That's important. I think we need to unpack the grievances and aspirations of both sides in order to create a one-state reality here where we're both experiencing victory in the subjective narrative we're living in. Right? That means, from my perspective, making the Jewishness of the country much, much, much deeper than it is right now, but at the same time softer. So that everyone with a Jewish education would see the Jewish identity of the state everywhere. And non-Jews, or even Jews who don't have much of a Jewish education, will barely notice. They'll just see a great society where they feel good, and they're prospering, and they feel equal. But that requires us to really get away from this idea of a European-style nation-state with Jewish decorations and really talk about what structures, what institutions, what policies on a deep level, the organs of the state, not the skin, but the actual internal organs of the state. How do you make those Jews? That's the restructuring I'm talking about. And I think that kind of Jewish state can make space for a non-Jewish population with full equality that doesn't feel like the Jewish state is something that threatens them. Because they have to probably think 15, 20 minutes before they even come to the conclusion, yeah, maybe there's something a little bit Jewish about it. Just like I would say the United States, when I grew up in the United States, I didn't notice how Christian it was every day. It wasn't in my face. But if you really start to think about like how the United States is structured, how it functions, what are its values, then you say, okay, it's kind of Christian. Christianity permeates the United States. But it's not something I necessarily felt othered by on a daily basis living there. And I don't want Palestinians to feel othered by the Jewishness of our state. I want them to feel included. And I want them to feel like their pain is recognized. Because we're responsible. And you know what? I don't even blame us, because it was right after Auschwitz. You know, the first people to mess with us as we come out of concentration camps are going to get hurt. That makes sense. But today, I don't think we should be afraid to acknowledge it. Not only acknowledge it, but to make it right. And I think that the Jewish liberation movement that should come after Zionism is one that protects all of Zionism's positive achievements while acknowledging and cleaning up its mess. And I think that will bring us towards a one-state reality where we have all the land of Israel, including Gaza, by the way. I think it's very important to mention that we do need to talk about the issue of Gaza, because there is a humanitarian crisis there today, and there's also a crisis in my heart that we're not able to live there. And so I think we need to return to Gaza. By the way, just a memory I have, probably, I guess, 16, 17 years ago, Rabbi Ishai and I were underground in Gush Katif, in Gaza, having the very same argument we're having right now. You know, I remember we were watching the movie Masada, and for anybody who hasn't seen Masada with Peter O'Toole and Peter Strauss, go check that out. It's one of the greatest Jewish movies ever made, in my opinion. And I remember us having this argument over U.S. imperialism and Israel's role and all that, 16, 17 years ago in Gaza. So B'ezrat Hashem will be able to return to Gaza, will be able to live in Gaza again, and the Palestinians who live there will have a much better life together with us than they do now, and we'll be able to continue this argument, because I don't think it's over.
Thank you, Yehuda. I think one thing we can all agree on is that we don't have enough time to really get to the bottom of this.
If I can have just 2 minutes, I'll keep it tight.
No, Yishai. Yeah. Yishai, you are going to have, we're going to do final thoughts. In your final thoughts, feel free to include what you want to say. And then Yehuda, you will have final thoughts. We're just going to need to accept that we're not going to, we're going to have to end it eventually. Just real quick about the after party while people are still here. Jesse, first of all, thank you, Jesse, our awesome intern, for helping us. Toss the Discord link in the chat so people can join. Once you go to Discord, you'll see Lounge on the left-hand side. Click Lounge. You'll be connected via voice. You obviously don't need to speak if you don't want to, but you could listen. And we're going to continue the conversation. One last thing. Freedom of expression is important. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Express yourself. And really what this does is just tells the YouTube algorithm to push it far and wide so people could see this very insightful and important conversation. And with that, final thoughts, friends. Yishai, all you.
I really enjoyed listening to Rabbi Yehuda, so I want to thank you, Adar, for this forum. I think that his last comments had a lot of depth and a lot to think about, and I feel very strongly that parts of what he said I'm like yes, and part of what he said I was like no. It's just a few little points in it. First thing, just the last thing about Gaza. When I was a child, we spent a lot of time in the Sinai. The Sinai was never really Egyptian. It's a complete British invention. Remember the Bible? You leave Egypt, you go to Sinai because it's a different place. The Sinai was given to our hands in war by God in 1956 and in 1967. And I absolutely believe that line in the desert, which separates the Negev from the Sinai, is one of the silliest geographic lines in the world. It's just totally arbitrary and fake. And the truth is that
I just want to be on record as agreeing with Rabbi Yishai on
right.
this.
Okay. I was sure. Like for me, I think about the Sinai all the time. Long story, but I just recently found out that we also controlled these little tiny islands that were at the mouth of the Straits of Tiran. They're called Tiran Island and another little island, and that we gave up these little islands also in the peace deal that was an American forced peace deal with Egypt. And I was like, I can't believe they returned these little islands. We could have used them as naval bases, at least to patrol to the Straits of Tiran, which is what the whole war was started about in the first place when Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran. So, like, okay, you want the Sinai back? I'm against that. But at least hold on to these little islands at the tip so we could have a naval base there. Like, I am 100%, I believe that Sinai should come back to our control, our sovereignty. And I would say that the best way to do it is the Abrahamic way, which is to purchase it. I would right now offer billions of shekels or whatever to Egypt and say, listen, it's going to be better for your security if we handle this place. Here's a lot of money so you could strengthen your economy. We'll send over advisors, whatever you need, but the Sinai should come back to our hands. And that will, by the way, choke out Hamas, who are the real instigators of that humanitarian crisis in Gaza, et cetera, the Sinai is our land. And when we say from the river to the sea, what does that really mean? A lot of times we understand that as either being, the Nile Delta or El Arish, whatever it is. But the bottom line, the Sinai, and you can see it on the map, it's just naturally part of Israel. So that's number one. Number two, with regarding to the British aiding Israel in their colonial enterprise, well, I mean, that's a little bit funny because some of the fakest countries in the world, Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, which is just one of the fakest countries around. Why is it fake? Because a fake king brought from a different place, taking over land that was not his, Arabian Bedouin king taking over land that was mostly populated by Arab Palestinians, had nothing to do with anything, just a favor to British friends. Jordan, and then also Iraq, the whole kingdom of Iraq, the Hashemite, kingdoms, both these places, they're the fakest creations in this region, and they partially on Jewish land. The British did a lot to help Arab imperialism as well. And so the British did a lot to mess all of us around. It's not like we, the Jews, were like aided by the British to subjugate the Arabs. I mean, remember Lawrence of Arabia, like the British, together with the Arabs, threw out the Turks, which was, by the way, the great thing for this region, to throw the Turks back. So there was some great stuff that happened through the British. Both Arabs and Jews enjoyed that, and in the end, we had to kick them out, and thank God that we did. But I just wouldn't want it to be painted through this conversation that as though like we were the beneficiaries of British imperialism and everybody else was the victim. That's not the way it was at all. And you yourself taught me how Jordan was British-led, British-trained, British-armed, and attacked Israel to try to destroy it. And Jordan to this very day is a fake country, and that country is the one that put most of the Palestinians into the so-called West Bank, and then took away willy-nilly their citizenship in the mid-'80s, the late 80s. And I say always, let's give them their citizenship back to the original Palestinian state, the original two-state solution, which was Jordan, again, Jewish land that was given to Palestinian Arabs in the original two-state solution. With regarding to what Yehuda said, which I found strange, Rabbi Yehuda said, which I found strangely beautiful, which is this idea that that Palestinians will live in this land without feeling that they're othered. I like that very much, and that really does bespeak of some of the biblical statements about how a ger toshav feels in this land, a resident alien feels in this land. That's a biblical concept, resident alien. It's not from America or from any place else. It's a biblical concept. But at the same time, the ger toshav, we have laws about how ger toshav is supposed to feel and how supposed to live in this land, and in many ways treated with love, with rights, with equalities, but not in total equality, because the word equality is not a regional word. No tribe moves into another tribe's region and is like, I demand equality. That's a Western word. That's a Western word. That is not a regional word. No Arabs talks to no tribe heads say, give me equality in your tribal land. It just does not happen that way. I say, give Palestinians who are allied with us, like the Druze, like the Bedouins, give them their freedoms and rights. Let them vote locally. Let them let them have self-rule in their big cities. Of course, not as a separate state. This is our land. Let them feel good in the land and have prosperity. But at the same time, to deny that the jihad feels that they have lost against us, and to not want them to feel that feeling of loss, I can quote to you many verses when Psalms, when it says, let them feel the loss. Let them feel that they were bettered. Let them feel that they were not given the opportunity to destroy us, to throw us into the sea. I don't have a problem with that. I even think that having a problem with that is a Western type feeling. Do you think that Yonatan, the Maccabee, had a problem with the Nabateans feeling that they were bested by the Jews? That's just the way it is around here. Tough noogies. That's just the way it is. People, I agree with you. You don't have to come in with a gun all the time and wave it around and be a cowboy. But let's be real. One of the reasons that the Saudis and the Emiratis are coming towards Israel today is because they realize we can't beat them. We couldn't beat them. Or another way, we lost to them. And the jihad against the Jews has been fruitless. And damn it, not only has it been fruitless because Allah is with the Jews, but also has turned into a curse for us. And we've been regressing in these last 100 years instead of developing. So new kings like Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, he is interested in rapprochement because he realizes that the damn thing is not worth it. It's not worth it to fight with the Jews endlessly because Allah is with him. And lastly, I'll finish off with this. Speaking of colonialism, the ultimate colonialism, the ultimate thing that we should really say al chet, that we sinned, was that we spoke with a lack of clarity. Now, one of the people that really was the architect of this lack of clarity was Moshe Dayan. Now, Moshe Dayan was a great Zionist army fighter, but when he took over, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank in the Six-Day War, he had this idea. The idea was, let them have the Temple Mount, let them have the Tomb of the Patriarchs and Matriarchs, because what they want is their religion. Give them their religion, but we take the land. We control the land, and they control the religion, and they'll be satisfied with that. Now, that is, I have to agree with Rabbi Yehuda, that is colonialism, because it's like, well, they have their religion and it's centered here. Good, let them do it. But we really want the land. We want the civil control. No, that is a deep misunderstanding about how the psyche of the region works, and it's a deep misunderstanding of what our Bible tells us. It tells us you've got to push back. You got to destroy the high places of the people who have an alternative narrative to yours. Usually there are idolaters. In this case, it's a little bit different. But still, there is an idolatry of a death cult that tries to destroy the Jewish people. And we had no right, historically, to let them continue to have a center of anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism in the holiest place on earth. To this very day, our own country enforces the rules of the jihad by not letting us pray and feel normal on our own Temple Mount. That was that occupation, that relationship with these places, as though they'll do religion and we'll do the land. I agree with, if Rav Yehuda means this, then I certainly agree with him that was a great mistake. And that led to, I think, one of the greatest sins of Zionism, and one that we perpetuate today, which is a lack of clarity. Speak in clarity. Sometimes that clarity can even be harsh, but people appreciate truth and they hear it when you say it. Give them borders, give them klalim, principles by which to live their life in our land, and that will make them feel like they are equal, that they have opportunities, just like Rav Yehuda said, which I really liked a lot. Let them feel like it's not constantly othered, but they will know that this is the Jewish state, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just like in Saudi Arabia that it's Saudi Arabia, and just like in Iran that it's got the deep Persian culture, you'll know that this is the home of the Jewish culture. In any case, I want to thank you, gentlemen, again so much, and it's been an honor thinking about the future of Israel and the future of this region together, and of course with the help of God.
Okay, when it comes to this lack of clarity, I definitely agree with you, and before I even get to that, I just want to say very quickly that you and I probably agree on the need to be strong, aggressive, forceful, in some cases merciless with the enemy. But I think we have a very big difference of opinion in terms of who we define as an enemy. And I think we have to be very careful now that we have power. This is one of the complications that comes with having power, which is something we're not used to. For 2,000 years, there were two kinds of humans. There were the Jews and there was the enemy. And in most cases, they were persecuting us, right? And the times that we were able to fight back and make them bleed were very rare. And now we have a situation where we have power again, but we still have our sense of vulnerability. I think we need to be sensitive to this, that we still have the trauma and the sense of vulnerability and the insecurities of the powerlessness that we previously, the situation we were previously in. So often we tend, I see this so much, and maybe I used to be guilty of this as well, as seeing people who want to fight us because they're legit being victimized by us on a daily basis as the enemy. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to define someone who wants to fight you because you're hurting them and you're not letting up, and you're just constantly hurting him, and his life is terrible because of you. He wants to fight. Of course he wants to fight. And I agree. The enemy, Rashi teaches us, the enemies of Israel are the enemies of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? But it becomes a little bit tricky when they're your enemy because of something you're doing wrong. So I think we need to really ask ourselves these questions. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is something I think we need to think about. This is something we need to analyze. It's something we need to discuss, just like we need to discuss so many issues that weren't relevant to us when we had no power. Now that we're back in our land, now that we're independent again, the discussions we have, the way we see things needs to evolve. And we need to make, and by the way, if we're able to create a situation where we're all living here together and they are included, and the Palestinians are equal in our society, and some still want to fight us, then there'll be much less confusion. But right now, it's kind of difficult. I also want to address this historical point of Zionists collaborating with the British regime. I by no means meant to say that the British established a state for us. They did not. In fact, the British did everything they could to prevent us from having independence here. They wanted to rule this country forever because of the oil to the east, which they were piping to Haifa, and because of the Suez Canal to the west, and maybe even the historic prestige of ruling Jerusalem. But there were many Zionist leaders who refused to see this. Just like I think many Zionist leaders or many Israeli leaders, especially on the right, have trouble seeing the dangers of our relationship with the United States and the way U.S. imperialism functions in the region. I think many Zionist leaders, including Jabotinsky, by the way, not only the labor Zionists and the Chaim Weizmanns, but even the Jabotinskys, had trouble recognizing the British as an enemy, had trouble recognizing that the British were doing everything they could to prevent our liberation. They collaborated with the British against our freedom fighters. And it wasn't the truth is, it depends how we use our terminology, but it wasn't the official Zionist leadership that fought the British and made them leave. It was the underground, it was the Lehi, it was the Lochamei Cherut Yisrael, the fighters for the freedom of Israel, who recognized the British as the enemy and who recognized the other peoples of the Middle East, of the Semitic region, as our natural allies and tried to create a united front. And in every society where you had leaderships collaborating with the British, you had revolutionary, progressive elements in those societies trying to fight against British imperialism. And it's a shame that those progressive elements weren't able to all unite against British imperialism, but that's what happened. That just needs to be clear. Now, in terms of lack of clarity, I think you're 100% right. I think that for the most part, Palestinians are victims of a Jewish identity crisis, and every Israeli leader they've been meeting until now has been lying to them, including Moshe Dayan, like you said. And that's why I think it's so important for Jews like you, Yishai, to be meeting Palestinians, but really listening to them, not dismissing their grievances, not saying that their story is fake or it's just propaganda to try and disenfranchise us, but actually listening to them, listening to their pain, being able to acknowledge where we're responsible, what we've contributed to the situation, what we've contributed to their suffering, and because we have power and this is our land and we don't have a right to this land, we have a responsibility to this land and to everybody in it, and to take responsibility. I think that's really the way forward, and it's not going to come from the Tel Avivim, it's going to come from Jews like you and Jews like me, and that's the only thing I really ask of you, Yishai, that next time you engage Palestinians, and I know you do so with a real open mind. Really listen to them and ask yourself the question, is this story true? Are they really suffering? Do we bear some responsibility? And is it in our power to fix
it? Thank you both. Yishai, I'm not hearing you. Yehuda, can you hear him?
Nope. I hear you, Adar.
No.
I am. I am. Just joking. Just one tiny point for Yehuda. I guess a point of disagreement between us is that I still see us very much under fire. I see us under fire in Hebron. I see us under fire in all of our borders. I see that any minute now we could have a launch of 200,000 rockets from Hezbollah, an Iranian nuclear bomb, a ISIS in Sinai, a naval attack, a sea attack from Gaza to Tel Aviv. Like in Hebron, I see a constant land takeover. I see a narrative that is, you're talking me being sensitive to them. Like I see a horrific insensitivity day in, day out. Insensitivity is just a silly word in this case. It's like an effort to as we say in Hebrew, latir damenu, to make our blood cheap, to make it like something that you can and should take. And so, like, I'm not there yet. Like, I don't believe, and I think this is a Palestinian narrative, which is like, you're the power now. You're the big boys. You know, it's still their region. We're still under attack. Yes, the Lord, Hashem, has given us strength to push back, but I don't think we're anywhere near yet this place where it's like, we're the big power broker, and they're the poor victims. Like, that setup there is just something I will not agree to yet. I just don't think it's true. And I think that we have a daily theft that I see out my window of our land, and I cry for the land of Israel. And we have a daily effort on the international level. Look at what's happening on the ICC. Look what's happening with just on Wikipedia, the war that we have to try to erase our good name that literally my friends and I are fighting just to keep our narrative true. So I wouldn't like make it out to be into this, I think, a very false equation that you and I have a disagreement on. I don't believe in that equation. They're the victims and we're the big strong guys. I'm sorry, it's not like that. This is their region. We're the minority. We have a protectorate. They keep on making incursions into our land and into our narrative, and I still think that there's a hell of a war still being fought. Now, if you say to me, listen to people more and try to analyze it with an open mind, I accept that. But I wouldn't make it so open as to not realize what the status of the conflict is.
I think you're right in terms of you and I. I think you're right in terms of me being more confident in our power, me feeling stronger. That's probably true, but I also think that the course of action that I advocate for, where I think we should go in terms of our relationship with the Palestinians, the region, the world, will make us stronger. Meaning, because I think ultimately a lot of the aggression directed against us is because we're perceived as a settler colony, because we behave like a settler colony. I'm not saying bend over. I'm not saying make yourself vulnerable. I'm saying stop behaving like a settler colony. And if we're able to do that,
they're angry at us because we're a colony. I thought that they were angry at us in Auschwitz, and they're angry at us when we're weak, and they're angry at us for every kind of way we can figure out.
I don't know who they is.
We're gonna need we're ending on a great note.
Okay.
We do have some common ground. Obviously, we're gonna need a few more hours to really dish this out, but let's leave it at that. I thought this was a great conversation. It seems like the viewers did as well. And the conversation actually is not over. So we're going to have an after party now in Discord. So that's it. Rabbi Yishai Fleisher, Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen, dear brothers, it was a great pleasure. And until next time, friends. And I will see you all in the after party in the lounge.